So my name is Erich Kurschat. Welcome to today's Harmony Insights. What am I calling these? Lunch dates. I started this late last week and we're going through this week. You can find more information at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, which allows me to help organizations use the DISC personality assessment right now, largely for managing and developing and engaging remote workers. A lot of what we do with this can be done online. I'm also the founder of Harmony Insights. I already said that. Owner of Harmony Insights, founder of HR Hot Seat. That's what I meant to say. The HR Hot Seat inclusive mastermind community, a place for HR professionals to come together and connect, especially now when it's harder to do that in person. We're doing a lot of that online, and you can find out more information about HR Hot Seat at hrhotseat.com. More important than all of that today is the special guest that I have joining me for today's lunch date, and that is Stephanie Waite, the president of ACMP Midwest. That's the Association of Change Management Professionals, their Midwest chapter. And from what I understand, if I remember correctly, there are 35 or so chapters around the world of ACMP, and the Midwest chapter is the largest. Is that right, Stephanie?
It is.
Excellent. Well, do you want to tell us just give us a brief introduction of yourself and the organization that you represent?
Yeah, you got it. Thank you for having me, Eric. And hey, everybody, thank you for putting on your webcams. It always helps me to talk to faces rather than just my own or Eric. So I appreciate that greatly. So again, thanks for having me today. I know we have a short time together. So a quick little brief introduction about myself. As Eric mentioned, I'm the president of the ACMP Midwest. We are the largest chapter in the world. I'm so proud of our board and our organization, where we really help people get to be where they want to be around becoming even more effective change practitioner. And then, as Eric knows as well, I'm also the co-founder with Brian Hampton for Change Nerd, which is an online virtual digital community of practice for change management practitioners or anybody who's an enterprise change maker. And then I've led leadership and organizational development in the healthcare space. I've been in the public education space. Actually, my background is in science and education. So really helping people get to where they want to be has really been my own personal philosophy. And when we think about that, getting people to where they need to be, it's really just change management. So using different enablers, learning, which is my background, engagement, culture, all those things that we know from an HR perspective, those are all enablers to help us really bring forth change and get to that next place. So.
Excellent. So if our attendees today hadn't figured it out, we're going to be talking about change management, and particularly sudden change, which we're kind of in the middle of now in a number of ways. Something that I could stand to learn quite a bit about myself. A lot of what I'm doing with these Harmony Insights lunch dates is kind of selfish in the sense that I'm bringing on guests who have something really inspiring to discuss that I can learn from personally. I want our conversation today to be both meaningful and actionable. And so I want to start off on the meaningful side of things. We'll continue with that, of course, but we're all responding to the coronavirus crisis in different ways. How has this COVID-19 business impacted you personally, Stephanie?
Yeah, I don't know if all of you on the call can tell, but I'm an extrovert. Surprise. And Eric and I have spent a lot of time talking about extroversion and introversion. So I would say one of the biggest things that have hit me is just the lack of connection to my community in the physical space. And thank God, my partner, he's amazing. It's great. We've been able to stay connected and bringing that energy together. But doing virtual dates, doing sort of the virtual gaming night and things like that help from a connection perspective. But what I've really been able to reflect upon in myself is really, where do I get my energy from? And if I can't get it from that physical connection of being with people, what does that look like? And what a lot of people have been talking about recently is, we're not necessarily going to get to a new normal, because our new normal is going to continuously change. So what I've really been trying to do is say, what is our current sort of ideal state? For the next week, what is my ideal state? Are there things I want to do? Are there people that I want to talk with? So really trying to create my ideal state week by week has been something that's really helped me to feel re-energized and stay energized.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. You and I have talked a lot about introversion and extroversion. I talk a lot about introversion myself.
Sure.
And you bringing that extroversion perspective has been so helpful. I've experienced, you and I have chatted, and that might be part of conversation today about change management. I've experienced grief in a very different way. A lot of the people in my network know that I sing classical choral music. I sing with a couple of choirs. And when we had rehearsed all season to perform this big Bach piece, 2-hour Bach piece in German, and we got up to performance time and had to pull the plug on our performances and the rest of the season before we had a chance to share this with the world, I experienced grief around music in a different way than I ever had before. That loss of opportunity almost.
Sure.
And I'd imagine there's some change management involved with that as well. Before we continue, I've put together a quick poll, and I'm going to try to use this now on Zoom. I'm learning Zoom myself. If you see this, hopefully you do, fill in the blank. I am a blank. I am blank skilled at managing sudden change. Are you not at all skilled? Are you somewhat skilled? Or do you consider yourself very skilled? Take a moment and respond to that poll, and we'll see how that comes together. Hopefully people can see that. I see some votes coming in already. So Stephanie, when we consider change management, whether or not it's sudden, how do you perceive individuals perhaps on this call as already being involved in some way with managing change as individuals or for their organizations?
Oh, for sure. I'll even go, you talked about, being personal, right? I'll go to the personal thing. I don't know if anybody on the call has ever, they've ran out of their favorite toothpaste or their favorite shampoo, and they go to the store, and you go to the store and your favorite shampoo or your favorite toothpaste isn't there. And you're like, but I need it. So you have to quickly transition or switch and get a new one. And you're like, oh, and you go through all the different phases, and you're actually managing yourself through change. I mean, people don't realize this happens on a really micro scale on the day-to-day. Same thing with, if you have kids or you have nieces or small kids around, they want to go outside, but you don't, you're managing them through that change of saying, how do I get them to stay in the house, not go through change? So it's kind of a comical, humorous one, but I really wanted to make it personalized. Change just isn't always something that is academic or something that is planned or so thought through that it has to take a long time. Change can happen really what we call episodically. So a quick little episode can occur, or it can occur incrementally. Many of you who are on this call, who are in HR, have managed, I would just say the coin term, a bajillion people through change to get to where they need to be, whether that be through, sort of disciplinary action, whether it be performance season, all of those behaviors that you're doing, all of the communication, all of the planning, all of the shifting to get somebody to do something new, that's all change management. And I actually will shift a little bit to another term called transition management. So Eric, if it's okay, I just want to define the two terms just so that we're all on the same page.
Sure. Let me add before you continue that we've had 7 people chime in for our poll. 5 of them consider themselves to be somewhat skilled at managing change or sudden change, and 2 of the 7 consider themselves very skilled at managing sudden change. Nobody has said not at all. So I think people recognize that they are in this space, whether or not they use that terminology in their title.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for that. And thank you for putting the poll in. It helps me to kind of understand where you all are and to sort of share the right knowledge with you. So when we think about change and transition management, change and transition are 2 separate things, but they're 2 very important things when we think about people in general. So change management typically is defined by a number of different academics as really around the event. So if you had to put change with a word, it's change as you're managing the event. It's a light switch that you turn on, essentially. So it's going to have a date, it's going to have a time, it's going to happen no matter what. We go through a process called change or change management. The person that's really behind all of that is John Kotter, if you guys are familiar with him. So change management's around the event. And then transition management is not necessarily around the event, it's around the people. So when we think about a word that has to do with transition, it's really the people. And what we find is that change is going to occur no matter what. People don't resist the change. They really resist that sort of internal psychological response that people have to the change. And I'll give you one example. I do this a lot when I talk about, trying to figure out the change and transition management differences. When you think about, and I would ask you, we're no longer going to sell coffee in the cafeteria, or no longer going to allow you to have any sort of coffee at all. Some people would sit there and they'll go, okay, why is she still talking about coffee? Like, I don't drink coffee. Another individual might say, well, I like tea, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing that. That's my own thing. I don't need coffee. Other people might have signed off this call in about 2 seconds and said, well, if they're not serving coffee anymore, I'm not going to stay here. My point is that it's one action. We remove coffee from everybody, but the internal psychological response, the transition is different for everyone. So the idea here when you're thinking about managing sudden change is that sudden change has such a huge and strong emotional connection to it. And often we don't have time to plan the change. It just came upon us. Therefore, we really want to focus a lot on transition management. And in transition management, we have 3 phases. The first one, Eric, you talked about. It's this losing, letting go, sort of ending phase where you experience grief. I talk about it a lot where if you have 2 trapezes on either side and an individual has to let go of one trapeze, fly through the air, and flying through the air is really what we call the neutral zone. It's where anxiety is heightened. It's where we don't know what's happening. Everything's broken apart. You sort of get this free falling sort of feeling, if you will. But it can also be a really exciting time. You're moving towards something else. So then that second sort of trapeze is what we call the new beginning. So everybody loses and lets go. They move through the neutral phase, which is sort of that trapeze flying through the air. And then they have the new beginning, which is really that new trapeze. And that's what we want everybody to get to. So I'll stop there, but that's really kind of the philosophy and the framework behind change and transition management.
I love this. I already want to sign up for your next session, your next ACMP session on this stuff.
Thank you.
You mentioned that everybody has a different way of responding to change and handling it, and that really resonates with me given the work that I do around the DISC personality assessment.
Sure.
You know, there are some DISC styles who take more readily to change and want to affect change if there is none in their environment. If things are unchanging for an extended period of time, they'll go nuts. They need to have change in their environment, and they do really well dancing with it. At least they feel that they do. Not everybody else does. Sure. And then some other people who say, you know what, I would rather prefer my environment be a little bit more predictable, scripted, some of these things that I feel like I can control. And as soon as things start to change, I get a little nervous because I don't know what the next steps are going to be, or, you know, that we move along to something that's maybe not as proven to what I'm used to. But as we all know at the same time that, you know, there's nothing, the only consistent thing in life is change. And so we have no choice but to dance with it in some way.
Sure.
So you've laid out some of the academics behind this. We have people on the call that are probably saying, especially related to coronavirus, you know, I'm managing change, whether or not I've seen it this way before, on a couple of levels. One is as an individual, like you said, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm seeing stuff or not seeing stuff I'm used to getting there. I'm having to educate my children from home. Perhaps that's certainly a change. But then also on a macro level, I am dealing with change for my organization. Which of those 2 things do you want to chunk off first? Because I think they're both really good conversations to have.
Yeah, I mean, start wherever you want to start, wherever you feel like your people would get the most benefit out of. I'm happy to talk about either.
Right. So, okay, I don't know that there's much we can do personally for our organizations or for the world in general until we have gained some clarity and confidence ourselves as individuals. So what are some things that people can do to recognize the change that they are faced with as individuals, with their families, with their friends, before they even go out into the world and try to be helpful to their organization?
Sure. One of my favorites, especially in this space, is we talked about this a little bit earlier, is anytime someone's going through change, whether it's yourself and, you know, you're sort of getting yourself ready, it's a concept called change readiness. We think about 2 things. We think about the emotional connection that somebody has to the change, and we think about the intellectual connection that somebody has to the change. So the idea there is that it's sort of like twofold, right? The ideal state is that we want both. We want somebody to have an emotional connection to the change. Like, this can help me, this will benefit me, I understand why this is happening, and sort of, you know, be emotionally connected to it, the heart, if you will. And then the second key piece is this intellectual connection. I understand the exact reason why we're doing it. It makes sense to me. I know where my place is as a part of it. So I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself, just to get yourself sort of set, is to kind of just do that quick assessment, is to say, where am I intellectually with this change? Do I really understand what's going on? And how emotionally connected am I to it? Is it really affecting me? Is it not? One of the best examples I could say is, I know all of you remember this back in the day, a couple of weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, when Lori Lightfoot obviously closed in Chicago here all of our parks, because there was a beautiful day and everybody went out to the parks and they were playing soccer and volleyball and basketball. My point is that people who aren't necessarily close to the change or have an emotional connection to it to understand the gravity of what's going on may make very different decisions than somebody who has a really strong emotional connection to something. So the idea here is to think about, where are you? You can say a scale of 1 to 5 if you want, on the emotional connection to this, right? And on the intellectual connection to this. And then the key piece to this is then to say, well, I'm not really intellectually connected to this. I'm strongly emotionally connected. Let me go out and get more in the intellectual space. So often, especially when we're trying to affect other people, especially in HR specifically, is we try to give people more and more information. But at the end of the day, we should really do a quick little assessment and say, do they really not understand it, or they just don't want to do it, right? There's this emotional.
Right.
Because throwing more information at them, they're already intellectually connected to it. So why are we wasting our time in that space? It may be helping them uncover what the barrier is for their emotional connection. And then vice versa, you flip it around. When people are strongly emotionally connected but don't have the intellectual scenarios or the information, we flip it and we say, then let's go into that space so people become connected to the change.
I love both pieces of it, but that emotional piece makes me think about all of the toilet paper flying off the shelves, at your local grocery store. I'd imagine there's a pretty significant emotional component there.
Sure.
What's your perspective on that? I've heard a couple of arguments as to why that has happened. I mean, clearly
Sure.
there's already enough to go around. And if we shopped, with our normal regularity, then
Sure.
there wouldn't have been an issue. But suddenly you go to the grocery store and there's nothing on the shelves. What is the emotional piece that you see tied to that behavior?
Sure. So in my very humble opinion, I've talked to a lot of people about this. I think it's, we're going into survival mode, right? So when you really think about, my family might be at risk, I might be at risk. It doesn't matter. We can't see what that risk is. It's not tangible. So what happens is we start to tell ourselves these stories, right? We start to say we're in danger. So what happens is people act very differently in danger, right? They go into survival mode. So you think about the fight or the flight. Right. And we've seen, I won't underscore this too much, but you saw, I'm sure many of you, some memes and some videos flying around about the toilet paper and people arguing with each other and ripping it out of people's hands. It really is about this fight or flight response that occurs when we feel like we're in danger. So the idea here is, how do we override that? How do we help people see, giving is much better than taking, right? We know we can create a flourishing community with a bunch of givers, especially according to Adam Grant and all his research. If somebody would have just said, here, you take one toilet paper roll, I'll take the other, and we start to share and showcase to each other that we're caring, a lot of that caveman mentality, and you go back to way in the beginning of time where everybody acted as a community, right? So the idea of, our families came together, we all cooked together, we were together as one. It wasn't your family had more than me. So it's this reframing of this mental model that's going on right now in a huge sense of urgency situation, in a huge health risk situation, which is really sending people into a huge survival mechanism and mode, which is causing people to go into this fight or flight. And then I choose a third one too. I call it the awake faint, where people just kind of go, and they're just kind of paralyzed and they just kind of stay there. So they're not fighting, they're not flighting, they're just sort of immobilized and paralyzed in this space. So they need someone to help them sort of take control and sort of move them into either direction or into a more of a stable direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it said, just yesterday I was listening to something where somebody said, when it feels like you have so little control over your life right now, what are the things that you can control? And at least if I have enough toilet paper in my pantry, in my closet, I have that taken care of.
Sure.
Everything else may feel like it's crumbling around me. It may not be, but I may perceive it that way. But at least I have the basic set, right? And then all of a sudden you go and try to get more of the people who hadn't yet gotten that far, and then there isn't enough to go around. And had we all kind of kept our cool, but that's the emotions taken over, right?
Absolutely. And I think too, depending, and I'm sure many people on this call, they may have had a family member who has been affected with COVID-19. They may know people who are healthcare providers, and a huge shout out to all of our healthcare providers. Being in the healthcare space myself, I'm so proud to say that I work for a healthcare organization, and our people are just incredible, and I have a lot of friends who are in that space. And I notice that our conversations, or my conversations with them, are much different because they're seeing people in the ICU. They're so much closer to the change. They're so much, closer to that emotional connection in such a grave way that a lot of us, right, who are going to, the park and those sorts of things, it's not bad or good. It's just different. So how do we help people heighten that awareness to the behavior that we do want people to see? I don't know if many of you saw Lori Lightfoot, our Chicago mayor, obviously, she put out that whole campaign around stay home, save lives. That was the most brilliant change management communication that I've seen in a very long time. Notice, and the big thing about change management is don't say what you shouldn't do. It's like dieting, right? Like don't eat cookies, don't drink soda, don't do this. And then you're awake fainting, right? So you're just like, and then what do? That night, you didn't eat anything all day. So therefore you go and you binge on the cookies. So the idea around change management that really comes from positive psychology too, is to focus in on what is the behavior that you do want to see. And you market that as much as possible. You communicate that as much as possible. So what did Lori Lightfoot do? Stay home, save lives, right? Stay home is the behavior we want to see. Brilliant change marketing, and it gives you the outcome. If you stay home, you will save lives. So the same thing when you're thinking about building change communications, a lot of times in HR, we tend to focus on sort of that evaluative language. Don't do this, you can't do this. Instead of doing those sorts of things, how do we put the positive reframe first? How do we say, here's where we're going. This is where we want to get to. Here's the behaviors we're looking for. And then you reward those as much as possible. It's actually a term, we call it bright spots. So you actually reward the bright spots or the small wins. So I'll stop there. There's a framework that I'll share too, just from a communication standpoint, Erich, but I want to make sure we answer your questions as well.
No, I love it. And from my perspective, I neither have children now, nor do I own pets. But I don't know that if this is oversimplifying things, but I can't help but think that a lot of what you're talking about applies in both of those scenarios.
And significant others. I didn't say that.
I feel like we've already begun to make this transition from how am I managing change in my own life as an individual to how am I managing change for my network or my organization. So I'd like to continue in that direction. Sean, I don't know if you noticed, sent something through chat that I think is a great point. He talks about, peers of his in corporate communications have crisis communication tool sets and expertise. That sudden change, and the word crisis certainly comes up. I'm glad he included that. It'd be great if change management professionals will expand that to say HR professionals perhaps had this crisis or rapid change tool skill set themselves. How much of your time that you spend talking about change management is focused in unsudden or crisis change, as opposed to change that's perhaps more anticipated, where you can say, okay, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, we're going to change the direction of our business. What do we need to do to ramp up to that?
Sure.
What percentage of your time is spent talking about less anticipated change, perhaps?
Yeah. What's fascinating, and this is sort of just a wild number I'll put out there, but I'll say 50-50. I'll say 50% of the time is spent on things that just come up suddenly. And what I'll say the most brilliant sort of way to get around this and thinking about them as separate is actually to focus in on the frameworks and I showed Erich these before. So this is William Bridges' book. This is like my favorite. It's all like, basically marked up. It has post-it notes everywhere. But once you know the framework, so Managing Transitions by William Bridges, he talks about the 3 phases that people go through. Once you know what those 3 phases are, there's no time limit for each of those, right? Like it doesn't matter if it's a year long and you have all this time to plan, or if it happened 30 seconds ago and you need to rapidly make a decision. I know in the back of my mind, the 3 phases that people go through every single time they make a change. So that's kind of like one caveat. The second, this is my second go-to, is HBR's top 10 must-reads on change management. The first article is from John Cotter, and he talks about his 8 steps on change. I know many of you are probably familiar with that. Once you know the 8 steps of change, I know in my mind whether or not that change can go in 30 seconds, 10 seconds, or I'm planning for 5 years. They're the same steps in sort of a chronology. So I know that the first step of John Cotter's model is create a sense of urgency. Hello, people. We don't need to create a sense of urgency during this change, right? Like it's already there. So he checked that off, or we checked that off for us. The second one then is building a coalition. How do I build a coalition of people? Well, most of us within our spaces have an incident command team or a team that's coming together that already is there to sort of set them, which is step 3, create the vision. So notice that in the back of my mind as I'm talking, I'm assessing where are we in change management. And it's only been 10 seconds, but I've already gone through and assessed the 3 first steps of change management. So I'll say when you think about crisis communication, the one thing that is much more urgent and relevant is having people move at a quicker speed. That would be the one difference and the one caveat. So it's even more important to go back to those two sort of things that I was talking about, which is, do people have the right intellect? Do they have the right knowledge about the change? Can you actually have someone regurgitate back to you what the key concepts are? And then two, are they emotionally connected to that change? So again, if it's a sudden change, we have to move much more quickly or more rapidly. If it's a planned change, typically we have a little bit more time where people's emotions can go through those ups and downs. They can fly through and take a couple extra swings on one side of the trapeze. In this case, we ask people to let go of that first trapeze immediately, fly through the air without even knowing where that second trapeze is. Mm-hmm. So there's a framework I'll give you, and it comes from William Bridges' Managing Transitions book, is the 4 Ps. P as in the letter P. I use it in every crisis communication and any communication with anyone that I'm trying to make sure that they are part of the change. The 4 Ps, the first one is the purpose. You always have to tell people, or always have to share the why behind why we're doing the change, or the why behind we're doing it. Simon Sinek talks about it a lot, to start with why, right? This why though, the one caveat I'll put on this, it might be different for different groups of people. So when you're thinking about doing change management, you can assess the groups of people that are going to go through this change, and the why might be a little bit different. You might have an overarching why, but you might have a couple of other mini whys. What's in it for them? The second P is really talking about sort of the picture. If I'm going to change something, I need to show you a picture, an illustration, as visual as possible. Think about, I don't know if anybody's ever had their bathroom redone, or Eric, if you've ever had your kitchen redone or whatnot. You don't just pay the contractor and say, yeah, come in and do whatever you want. I trust you. You're like, show me the illustration. No, I don't want my, right?
I would never say that.
Right? So you have to show people the picture. If you want me to get there with you, what does the landscape look like? What's the behaviors that people are doing? What does excellent look like? Help me get there. So purpose, the picture. The third one is the plan. What is the plan? It could be as simple, if you don't know, as 1, we're doing discovery phase, 2, we're doing the planning phase, and 3, we're doing the execution phase. That could be the plan, right? Very relevant for right now, especially. And or it can also be then sort of a level down or 2 to each of the different groups of people that you're talking to. Really detailed plan that's specific and purposeful for them. So third is plan. The fourth one and the last one, which I think is the most important because it gets to the people side of things, is the part. What is the part that you're asking people to play? It's an ask. It's an engagement mechanism and tool. It's a retention tool as well. You're trying to retain people through whatever the change is. So at the end of the day, you told me what the purpose of the change is. You told me the picture, and you've created this beautiful illustration around it. You've given me the plan, and then you just wind me up, and now I'm like, what do I do with this? The fourth one is the anchor for people. We've wound people up. Now let's give them a direction to go, or let's ask them how they can use this information, this knowledge, so that everybody's rowing in the same direction to get to the change that you want them to get to.
This is brilliant. I wish we had at least twice as much time to go into this. It's been so helpful, Stephanie. I want to respect your time, everybody else's time. The way I've been doing these is we're officially ending it at 12:30, but then sticking on for anybody who wants to enter a question into the chat. We might be able to take a few additional questions, but just so that we do officially end on time, Stephanie, this has been so helpful. Where can people follow up with you if they want to learn more about you, ACMP Midwest, Change Nerd, or anything else that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Stephanie Waite, obviously. So you can message me on LinkedIn, or go for it and connect. Make sure you put in there like I saw you on with Eric, and that way make sure that I can accept you. And then also you can always email me too at president@acmpmidwest.org. So president@acmpmidwest.org. Or if you don't like that email, you can email me at stephanie@changenerd.com. stephanie@changenerd.com. Sometimes that's easier for people.
Excellent, so helpful. If you've enjoyed this today, those of you who have attended, we've had at least 20 people on. If you've enjoyed this, share with your networks, harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. We have a handful coming up this week around the importance of play, especially for adults in the work that we do. That's going to be great with my friend Ben Warzinski later this week. We're going to talk about networking online. We're going to discuss, I think on Wednesday, we're going to talk about engaging and developing a remote workforce. Friday is going to be how to get clarity and control of your job search for those of you who may be in transition. So a week coming up, and I may continue this beyond this week, depending on the reception we get. So if you've enjoyed this, Spread the word by sharing harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. This has been so helpful, Stephanie. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
being a
having me.
part of this. No
Yeah, anytime.
problem.
Oh, thank you.